if someone told you they were going to take a tube screamer, run it into an HM2, into a metal zone, and then skip the amp completely and go straight to IR, you'd probably think that is going to sound horrendous. And in many cases, you'd probably be right. It took a while to kind of dial this in, but it is a combination that I think works. And I think it's also kind of better not going into an amp. Probably you've seen Ola's video years ago about why the metal zone sounds better into a power amp, even though Boss has also said that it is designed to go in front of an amp, not as a standalone preamp. But it is a pretty capable standalone preamp. It may not be the world's nicest distortion flavor, but I've been doing a number of videos about solid state amps. I did one last week about the Crate GX600. I did a couple not long ago about the PV Bandit, how it works with the HM2. Done a lot of videos on the HM2. It's kind of been a staple of this channel for as long as I've been making YouTube videos. My first ever gear video was about the HM300 from Behringer. So I like cheap gear. I like solid state gear. I like expensive tube amps too, but I am the kind of person who, if I can get a cool tone from something that costs way less, I'm into that. I'm kind of more interested in that just because, I mean, I could tell you that a $5,000 boutique amp sounds good, but you probably know that. If a $50 crappy old amp sounds good too, well, that's news. That's interesting. So today I have an all Behringer pedal board, and I just got in the Tube Screamer, which, funny enough, I don't own any other Tube Screamers. I have a Klon, I have a Boss OD3, and I have a full tone Fat Boost. I have a couple overdrives and stuff, but I don't have a Tube Screamer. So I picked up the Behringer Vintage Tube Overdrive, which is a Tube Screamer clone, and it can sound pretty spot on to the original. I don't even care if the distortion sounds perfect because I don't hardly ever use the distortion on a Tube Screamer. It's pretty much just a fixed EQ curve and a boost. So it really doesn't need to be expensive or fancy. And then I'm running into my custom painted HM300, which is an HM2 clone. And also I picked up this ultra metal UM300, which is a metal zone, which I also don't own a metal zone. And I've kind of wanted to buy one for a while, but it's like, I don't know if I'm going to like it. I've got some metal zone plugins. I talked about getting the At the Gates Slaughter of the Soul tone. When I did my video recreating that tone, I used a couple of plugins for the HM2 and the metal zone. And today I'm using a couple of cheap clone pedals. This tone isn't trying to emulate anything. It's just me playing around with stuff until I liked it and then writing a song. And then I also ran the bass through the metal zone. And I also have the Behringer noise suppressor here, which is a clone of the Boss NS2. And it does allow you to do the 4-cable wiring, which is a nice feature, even though I would say it's not the snappiest, most responsive noise gate in the world, but I have one, and it does have that feature, which is cool. So enough preamble, let's get into the jam, and then I'll tell you how I set up the pedals and what I did in the mix, which was also a very quick mix, not using really any expensive plugins or much effort. So let's go. So here's my lovely pedal board for today. Got the noise reducer up first, and I took out the ins and outs just to make it look a little nicer, but there is the guitar going in there. The out goes to the interface. The send goes through the pedal board, and the return goes back. This eliminates noise from the pedals, or at least reduces it a lot. Next up is the Tube Screamer, the vintage Tube Overdrive, and it is set up like I always set up when I'm using plugins of Tube Screamers, or even something like a Klon. Output is all the way up, distortion is all the way off. Tone knob, I usually keep it around 6 or 7, or noon if it's maybe got too much mids. The HM300, I've got set up a little differently today. I don't usually set it up like this. It's not your chainsaw, but I've got the level all the way up, the distortion off, so it's just basically an EQ circuit, and I've got the EQ basically at noon. It does still get some of that chainsaw flavor, but it's not over the top, and I didn't really want it to sound like that, but if you play with it on and off, it does definitely add some of that HM2 flavor, and it also adds a bunch of gain, which I don't think is entirely necessary going into the metal zone. It's got plenty of gain on tap, but it is getting boosted here and here. Then the distortion on the metal zone is pretty low, only about a quarter up. I've got the EQ sort of moderate, but this EQ is so extreme, and part of the reason I think the metal zone gets a bad reputation because it can just go way overboard. So I hunted around with the mid frequencies the most, and it's hard to tell. This goes from 200 to 5K, which is a pretty big range. I'm going to guess it's targeting somewhere between maybe, I don't know, 500 and 1K, but it's hard to tell exactly. I just boosted the mids, and I listened for frequencies I wanted to get rid of, and I cut them. And I try not to cut it too much, but any more than this, and it started sounding not scooped enough, even though I don't want it super scooped, if that makes sense. And then I've got some boost on the highs and lows, and these are so sensitive that I would just play for a few minutes and move it like a fraction of a millimeter, it felt like. It's really kind of ridiculous how sensitive they are. That took a while to dial in. And then the level is just set to go out at about -12. So it's not a complicated setup. And then let's go over to Reaper, and I'll show you my mix, which is also very simple today and not really using anything expensive plugin-wise. Here's my mix. I haven't even mastered it yet, and I haven't totally finished it, but I don't think much will change. I am using on the guitars, first up, the Tube Power Amplifier. This is a free one from Ignite, and it's adding a little bit of depth and presence. And the presence on this is a little nicer than the high knob on the metal zone. So if I wanted to push the highs a little bit extra, this was a smoother way to do this. It's a free plugin. It's not really doing a whole lot. It's not entirely necessary. You can check out the back. It's got a touch of resonance. I turned the bias up a little bit, and it's got oversampling. I'm using the EL34 because they're kind of the warmer tubes, and this is already a kind of scooped and spiky tone. Next up is the crown. I'm really just using this for the cabs. You can see the amp is off. The pedals, I have the noise gate on just to cut out that little extra that the pedal doesn't get rid of. The other pedals are off. The cab, I'm just using this one that it comes with. Pretty standard settings for me. This is kind of the cap edge. Got it mostly on the 57. High pass at 100, low pass at 12,000. That's it. There's no effects. And then I've got 2 EQs going on after this, which sometimes I just like to open up a second EQ rather than add it all to one because it's a little easier to look at. Yeah, so they're both doing kind of similar stuff. This one's doing some filtering, a little roll off in the highs. I'm boosting a little bit of the presence, but rolling off some of the highs that get kind of spiky with the metal zone. Then this one is also just dumping some bass. I'm boosting a little bit of the mids. I'm cutting this resonant frequency pretty steeply at about 4K because this was where it was really harsh and nasty. So I just tried to get rid of that. It otherwise doesn't really change the tone that much. It just clears up a lot of nastiness. And then I'm adding in a little extra presence because I wanted it a little brighter. So that's all I'm doing on the rhythm guitars. And it's the same effects copied over onto both of them. And then the lead effects are, again, the same things, but I am using a different cab here to give them kind of their own tone. And then I'm using the delay and a little reverb. The EQ on these is a little different, but it's kind of a similar idea. I'm more aggressively rolling off the bass, cutting a little bit of honky mids at around 1K. I'm boosting this up here around 2-3K to give it a little more cut through the mix. I'm again taming some resonance around 6K here. And then this one is after that, following up by scooping some out and cutting around 4K. When I set these up, I'm not sitting here and analyzing exactly every EQ move. I'll pull it up, I'll make some moves, I'll make sure that they're good, and then I'll sometimes pull up another EQ, do some more, and then, go back and do a little tweaking, make sure that everything is fine and I'm not going overboard. For the bass, I've got it tracked twice through the Morley AB pedal, and then it's only running through the metal zone. And then that's just going right into NAD IR, and I've got this CCOW Ampeg SVT 810. This is just one of the blends that Brian made with this pack, and I liked it. I spent about 10 seconds choosing it, and it's the same. I've got a metal zone only tone, and then I've just got a clean DI. I'll throw some compression on it. I might cut the highs out of the low track or reduce them, depending. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I will probably cut some of the lows, maybe a lot of the lows, out of the distortion track. But that's my basic kind of split distortion clean thing. Usually the cleans are on the lows, the distortion takes the highs. And depending on the setup, I change sort of where that happens and how aggressively it happens. For the drums, I'm using the Tight Studio drums from Ugertone. I did a video on this the other day. I like it. It's on sale for $10. It's really worth it for what it is. It's a nice library, and I chose it because it's cheap. And in the spirit of this little demo, everything is cheap. And I used the Noob Metal preset, and I did some tweaking. I turn off the effects, I turn off the humanize, and I may have messed with these levels a little bit. I just load up a track template I made. It's really simple. But I probably tweaked that a little bit. The kick, this is a 1176 style compressor. This is probably the most expensive plugin in the whole mix, ironically, but I have all this stuff from Black Rooster Audio. You don't have to use this plugin, doesn't matter. But it's an 1176 style. That's what I like to use. I like this plugin. It's become my stock compressor. And I'm not really going to go through all the compressor settings. They change. One thing I will say about compressors right now is that you should play around with the attack knob. I often just set it all the way to slowest because it's the most clean and neutral. But I've been trying and playing around with making the attack faster so that it cuts off more of the transient. It kind of smashes the drum a little more, and it gets you more of the tone in the body of the drum up front. It does, squash the transients more. It is more affected sound, but it makes sense for what I'm doing in the context of this mixing style, making metal music. You don't have to go for the most pristine, clean sounds, obviously. So sometimes a faster attack, it gets you a nice aggressive sound. Play around with it. And that's pretty much all. I've got different settings I set up for the snare and the toms. And here's my snare EQ. Pretty simple. Here's my toms EQ. The rest I just copied over. Overheads, very gentle compression. Room, aggressive compression. I smashed the room a lot. And then I've got the exciter from Audio Assault as well. Just doing a little bit of extra excitement, extra distortion on the room track. And that's all I have so far. I probably won't really add much more to this mix besides a little mastering, maybe a little bass effects, because I haven't done those yet. So again, point being, it's dead simple. And if you want to look at the project, there's also not that much going on. I haven't fully edited this yet, so my apologies. I haven't color-coded everything. But here's what it looks like after tracking. I've got 2 hard pan guitars. I've got, again, my distorted and my clean bass. And then I've got a lead and a lead harmony. And then here's my drum track. My drum track, I played on the E-kit, and then I edit it so that the timing is better. But I don't edit it 100%. I do try to leave it a little bit natural, though. not quite as natural as I play, if you know what I mean. So that's that. That's how I made this song. And this is one of the simpler ones because I'm going to try to get this done tonight. So I'm not really going to do a whole lot of messing about with trying to worry about every little thing. So that's it for this mix. So I hope you enjoyed this more casual and low effort production, looking at a board you could buy for probably under $100 or around that, and trying to get some good tones from what should be, on paper, a pretty bad sounding setup. And I hope you'll agree that it's at least better than you'd expect, if not a pretty killer tone. I think it came out pretty nice. So that's what I have for you today. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.